So today I'm really happy to welcome Brianne Dos Santos, who's a manager in the International Center, which is a crazy busy place. And if this module is to talk about employee engagement and organizational chart and performance and recruitment and all the other resources, the International Center is a happening place with lots of people zooming around doing lots of work. So thanks for coming, Brianne.
You're very welcome.
These folks would have done this section. We would have resources and some tips and tricks and everything else, but we're not really listening to a manager in the first person.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess, first of all, if you could put your place in a position of a new manager, maybe think back, and if you could give tips to maybe the 3 or 5 HR-related things that a new person would benefit to know, what might those be?
So I think first things first, I would suggest that a new manager reads the collective agreement. I would say it's probably impossible to manage within a unionized environment without really fully understanding what the expectations are, both from the support staff and also management. So really having a full understanding of what's in there and what parameters need to be respected.
And that's going to take some time to go through, right?
It is a large and in-charge document. I didn't actually do this, and this is why this is my advice for new managers, because I learned as I went along because I was making mistakes, because I didn't realize the importance of seniority in some of the decisions I was making. I didn't even know where to find a seniority list. So those are things that I think read the collective agreement, understand what the expectations are, and understand where to find really important things that the collective agreement is talking about, like the seniority list.
Right.
I would also suggest to a new manager that they should right away make an appointment with the payroll supervisor and also their HR consultant. Mm-hmm. And the reason I say that is because we are kind of a complicated institution here.
True.
We have lots of different systems, and it's not always that intuitive as to which system to use. So, for example, we have full-time permanent staff that use the absence management system. We have part-time staff that use a time entry system in which they use a paper version of a time entry sheet which needs to be inputted by somebody in your department, and then the manager has to approve. Right. We also have a completely separate system for employees who are full-time contract. So they have a completely separate system in terms of how they report their absences or how they're paid. And then finally, there's another system called the workload management system. And the workload management system is one where you track loo time accumulation, and you track things like when you have folks who are averaging of hours. Right. So really, you've got absence management system, time entry system, workload management system, and then this other kind of full-time contract system. And you have to know not just how to use those systems, but which of your employees fall under which of those categories.
And you've got to be talking to those employees in real time to find out who's doing what when.
Absolutely. So you've really got to get it straight in your head right off the bat. Who are you and which category do you fall under, and how can we make sure that you're paid appropriately and that you are reporting your absences appropriately. So that's why I say that. Meet with the payroll supervisor, meet with your HR consultant, find out what is your team makeup and how do you make sure that you're supporting your team members appropriately.
Yeah, good point.
Think like and just to follow up on that, I mean, I didn't know until very recently what averaging of hours even meant. I had to have a 1-hour tutorial on that because it's quite complex, especially in the International Center where we have folks who are traveling around the world. Are they paid for the time on the plane? Are they paid for there's just a lot of really kind of intricate and complicated factors that you need to sit down with somebody and have them explain it to you.
Yeah.
And then finally, I would say, and this is something that has come up for me a little bit more recently, and that is really understanding our performance management system here. So my suggestion to any new manager would be, at the first sign that there's any kind of challenge or problem within your team, reach out to your HRC, consult with them around what it is that you're experiencing, and how do we manage it appropriately? How do we have the right kinds of discussions with our staff? And how do we document those discussions if necessary? And so it's really important that you're reaching out and getting that kind of advice from your HRC, because you don't want to overstep your boundaries. You want to understand when it's important to have the union represented there, when it's not important, when you can just have a basic conversation with someone around expectations.
So that's an area where the stakes are a little higher. So as you say, get preemptive advice on the best path to follow.
Absolutely. And they provide you with templated documents so that you are following kind of a more prescriptive template around what it is that you need to say to them, so you know in advance what you need to say, and then you can document after the fact, I actually said these things. So it's really, really important from a performance management perspective. As a new manager, you want to have others think that you're addressing issues head on, not that you're ignoring them. And I think it bodes well for everybody when you address those types of situations right on. So making sure that you're just doing it the right way and doing it as HR would expect you to do.
And find out which is the right way here, because it can be different from where you came.
Absolutely, and that's true for almost everything at Fanshawe, I would say. Someone coming in who understands the budgeting system somewhere else, for example, you don't know the budgeting system at Fanshawe. It's quite complicated and complex. So, that would be the same for anywhere.
Very neat. Good. So I guess, sort of anecdotally, if you can remember back, again, your early times, was there one particular thing that was the most frustrating for you? I mean, it's always frustrating in a new role, in a new position, in a new company. Was there something that you can remember having a learning curve and finally figuring it out?
Many things as it relates to HR, but something that I haven't already mentioned would be things like, how do you post a job? Okay. How do you manage the recruitment process? Because it's not necessarily, the system itself, which is called Fanshawe Works, so yet again, another HR system, another one, so that's the fifth one now we've talked about.
Right.
So Fanshawe Works is very straightforward, very user-friendly. You go in, you post your job, you have some back and forth with your HRC around approvals and what it's going to look like on the portal. But where it gets a little bit more complicated is is after the applications actually come in, because there's certain wording around these positions around when the competition is competition is open to, let's say, all employees. Certain employees get first consideration. And then who gets consideration after that,
so
and then who
gets protocol.
consideration. There are certain groups, employee groups, who have first, let's say, dibs at certain jobs, and so that's where it becomes a little bit more complicated, and that's where often I have to go to the HRC and say, explain this to me again. Tell me the difference between an Appendix D versus a part-time employee at Fanshawe versus a contract employee versus a, and how does that all work? Because obviously we're all aiming for the most skilled and appropriate person for the position, but there are certain layers of HR guidelines that we need to follow in terms of who gets first priority or first consideration in the hiring process. And then what follows along with that in terms of what was kind of challenging to understand was our process around performance appraisals. So when new hires come into the college, they have a 3-month probation, 3-month performance appraisal, a 5-month performance appraisal, and then after 6 months we decide if the probation is waived and they continue on as a full-time permanent position without any type of probation conditions on their employment. But then of course the question becomes, and this is where we struggle a little, how often do we need to do performance appraisals? Should it be yearly? Should it be done more often? Should it be done as needed? Should it be, because we are certainly required to provide these forms to HR during the first 6 months, but after that it's not as rigid.
Right.
And from a manager's perspective, I think I always want to be providing feedback to my staff. But when does it actually have to become formal feedback where I'm actually writing it down?
Right.
So that still is a little bit of a gray area for me, even after so many years of being a manager. It's,
And, and I hear just from talking to other managers, for many of these positions, you strive for a once-a-year performance conversation. And then depending on some situations and circumstances, it's hard to get them done.
mm-hmm.
And that could be all three areas.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Very, very challenging. So yeah, that's really something that I thought was a fairly major challenge.
Good.
Yeah.
So I guess really the last question I would ask you is maybe let's put the HR portfolio aside for a second. So
mm-hmm.
if we had a brand new manager sitting down, joining us in the room right now,
mm-hmm.
What inspirational tips or parting words would you have for them? That this is maybe their first few weeks.
Sure.
They're trying to absorb all the information.
Mm-hmm.
Their head's spinning a bit.
Mm-hmm.
What would you tell them?
So, well, I would say, first of all, and it is actually HR related, I would say stay on top of things.
Okay.
Things are always changing. So, for example, in the last, let's say, year, on the HR front, we've had part-timers who have voted to become part of the collective agreement. That's going to be a huge change. You need to be aware of what's going on and how it impacts your team members. We've had the minimum wage increase. And so we have, all of your folks who were on minimum wage, which for us is students, because we like to employ our students. So that not only impacts the students, meaning they'll be paid more money, but also our budget. And then finally, Bill 148 was introduced. What does that mean for our team? You have to stay on top of these things that are happening in order to be able to seem knowledgeable when someone comes to you and asks you, am I now entitled to a sick day, 2 sick days? Am I now entitled to, higher pay because my job should be, categorized in the same way as a full-timer? If you just sit there with this blank stare because you have no idea what they're talking about because you don't know what Bill 148 is, or you don't realize there's a minimum wage increase, you're not going to look very, very educated on the topic.
Right.
Outside of HR, I would say 2 things. I would say, number 1, ask questions. There are tons of folks at the college, and it's sometimes hard to know who to go to, but find your contact in each of the areas and ask questions before you do a task that you're not 100% certain about. I made the mistake a couple of times of going ahead and doing something that I thought I knew how to do, and rather than a quick phone call to just clarify that I was doing it right, I did it wrong.
Yes.
And then I had to go and beg for forgiveness and ask somebody to please fix my error. And I think that person, in those cases, would have probably rathered me call them preemptively and just said, please, could you please go through this?
It's a tricky balance with the initiative, taking initiative, trying to figure it out, but then again, the stakes are high and it's so complex here.
Stakes are very high. Yeah, one little mistake and you could be impacting quite a significant number of things. And then I would say that the final suggestion would be to attend the community of practice sessions that are held, because those sessions are held, I think they're monthly, and they're really on topics that are relevant and will make an impact not just at Fanshawe but in the industry. And what I like about those sessions is that you get an opportunity to sit in a room for a couple of hours with managers who either have tons and tons of experience and have the historical context, or brand new managers who have a fresh perspective and are coming in with eyes wide open and looking for ways to make change. And so you can really benefit in these sessions from learning from both of those groups of managers, and just the networking opportunity, the understanding that, oh my goodness, I'm not in this by myself. Right. That manager over there who's been here for 20 years is having the same problem with X, Y, and Z as I am. So now I'm going to know that I can go and talk to that person. Right. So I find those community practice sessions really, really invaluable.
Yeah, quite often you're solving each other's issues.
Absolutely.
And right on the spot, which is really good. Excellent. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Brianne Dos Santos, thank you for taking time out of your busy day. And that's going to wrap up this section, and you folks have a great day.